Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat. The session is about to start.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this next session, which is, it's called Going Green, Unlocking the Renewable Energy Potential. And it's obviously a very important topic for what we're discussing here today. The majority of countries within the Mediterranean and North African region have developed strategies, visions, projects for clean energy, for green energy transition. But that said, I think there's a microphone issue, which we'll resolve. But I'll keep going. But that said, as we know, there has been a lot of uncertainty. And the uncertainty means, exactly. Thank you. Someone can help the minister, maybe, because I'm not an expert in microphones. Ci scusiamo. And as we know, a lot of uncertainty and everything that's happened with COVID, with the war in Ukraine, has made it more complicated, the issue is no longer at the forefront. So today we'd like to discuss this topic in depth with our distinguished panel of speakers, which I thank all of you for being here. The Minister Gilberto Pichetto Fratin, a Minister for Environment and Energy Transition in Italy. Hello. Thank you for being here. And we have Laila Ben Ali, who is Minister for Energy Transition and Sustainable Development in Morocco. Thank you. Konstantin Skregas, Minister of Energy and Environment for Greece. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to have all these wonderful speakers. And Obama Mobares, the Secretary General for the East Mediterranean Gas Forum. Thank you so much. Gilberto Dialuce, at the very end, the President of Enea Italy, and Samantha Gross, Director, Energy Security and Climate Initiative for the Brookings Institution. Thank you, Samantha, as well, for being with us. All right, so without further ado, I would like to begin. I'd begin with the Italian minister, and I'll be moving to Italian and then switching back. Quindi passo all'italiano per questa parte della sessione, e ringraziandola ancora. Allora, la crisi energetica, che è il topic di oggi, mi interessava la sua visione su come possiamo uscire da questa crisi in cui ci troviamo in questo momento, nel breve, ma anche come il governo italiano e quali strategie sta mettendo in atto per poi diversificare e uscirne nel lungo termine.
Grazie. Innanzitutto grazie ai colleghi presenti, a tutti loro, anche quindi con il benvenuto in Italia, almeno per questo panel lo posso dire io. Noi crediamo che l'invasione dell'Ucraina da parte della Russia abbia ridisegnato e stia ridisegnando quello che è il quadro geopolitico, in particolare sul fronte energia. In questo settore l'Italia è fortemente impegnata nell'accelerare la transizione energetica, aumentare le condizioni di sicurezza energetica e naturalmente proseguire su quello che è il percorso di decarbonizzazione. Tutto questo quindi si inserisce in un percorso che era avviato, che era molto più lento, ma che in questo caso ha avuto una forte accelerazione. Quindi si tratta davvero di fare una valutazione di breve termine sulla contingenza attuale e di medio-lungo periodo che investe fortemente l'area mediterranea. Nel maggio del 22 la Commissione europea ha presentato REPowerEU con una serie di risposte a quelle che sono le perturbazioni causate dalla guerra e le azioni che noi possiamo mettere in atto. L'Italia si è mossa in modo rapido nell'azione di sostituire quella che era il quantitativo di gas russo, che era comunque, ricordiamo, il 40% del fabbisogno nazionale. Il fabbisogno nazionale italiano è di circa 75-76 miliardi di metri cubi e naturalmente 30 di questi 75-76 miliardi provenivano dalla Russia. Oggi è molto, molto più ridotta, ragioniamo sul 10-15%, bisognerà naturalmente in riduzione. Tutto questo ci ha determinato di essere ad oggi sulla contingenza con una discreta tranquillità sul presente, con una discreta tranquillità quindi sull'inverno con gli stoccaggi, naturalmente però impegnati a creare una condizione per riuscire a creare gli stoccaggi, la garanzia di riserve sicura per il 2023, non avendo più il quantitativo di gas russo per raggiungere gli stoccaggi durante il periodo estivo. Sul fronte invece di medio-lungo periodo noi siamo impegnati nel diversificare quelle che sono le fonti del gas. La diversificazione è venuta dapprima con un forte incremento, un aumento della capacità di importazione, in particolare dall'Algeria, dove abbiamo aumentato notevolmente le nostre importazioni. Successivamente, naturalmente, il gasdotto TAP ha dato un ulteriore impulso. Inoltre confidiamo nell'impegno di Eni e Snam nella ricerca di tutta una serie di altre soluzioni che passano tramite 2 rigassificatori che sono previsti, uno a Ravenna e uno a Piombino. Piombino garantirà a partire dalla primavera di quest'anno e quindi come contributo anche allo stoccaggio circa 5 miliardi di metri cubi di gas. A fianco di tutto ciò, con accordo anche con l'Unione Europea, c'è l'azione di riduzione dei consumi di gas naturale con una riduzione dei consumi complessivi. Questo potrebbe portarci come obiettivo finale dei 30 miliardi di metri cubi che l'Italia prendeva dalla Russia, sostituire 25 miliardi, sostituirli con le altre fonti e 5 miliardi prevederli complessivamente in riduzione. A fianco di tutto ciò, nel medio-lungo periodo, c'è l'altra valutazione che dobbiamo porre che riguarda le fonti alternative, perché se il gas è il veicolo di transizione, vorrei ricordare che per l'energia noi utilizziamo ancora in parte carbone, utilizziamo petrolio, ma naturalmente l'obiettivo è quello delle energie pulite, quelle sul fronte della decarbonizzazione e questo determina dapprima il rilascio, l'abbandono del carbone, del petrolio e poi al crescere delle energie rinnovabili e naturalmente con questo ci mettiamo anche il grande sforzo che si sta facendo sull'idrogeno, anche in raccordo con alcuni paesi e poi geotermico, eolico e fotovoltaico per raggiungere man mano e far decrescere il quantitativo di gas utilizzato. È un disegno di di una grande transizione che deve raggiungere l'abbattimento come impegno del 55% al 2030 e naturalmente la neutralità nel 2050. Ecco perché è un percorso a tappe che ad esempio prevede un impegno di attivare di rinnovabili almeno 10 gigawatt per ogni anno nei prossimi 5 anni, 10-12 gigawatt nei prossimi anni. Questo ci permette di raggiungere non solo l'obiettivo base di un equilibrio rispetto al gas e rispetto alle energie, ma di raggiungere anche gli obiettivi dell'intervento rispetto al clima e rispetto quindi alla neutralità assoluta.
Grazie. Sì, certo, non semplice tutto questo, ma è bello vedere come potrebbe funzionare, qual è la strategia. I'll now switch again back to English, and I wanted to ask Leila Ben Ali, the Moroccan minister, about your country's strategy, because your country is very advanced in energy transition. And so I was curious, about how to further develop the Moroccan energy transition, prospects for development, investments, both from abroad and at home. You could tell us a bit more. Because he just told us what we plan to do, but I'm very curious to see how it works.
Sure. No, thank you very much for this invitation and for this setup, which is, I think, a very nice and timely setup to discuss the issues around energy transition. And the way we look at it in Morocco is very similar to how we've been pushing things since the last 2 decades, actually. And to put things simply, our energy strategy was very much pushed by the vision of His Majesty the King, who really wanted for renewables to play a leading role. And that was really before the 2008 financial crisis, to play a leading role in our electricity and energy system. So if you look at our energy strategy that was put in 2009, the triangle that we had, which is ramping up renewable energy in our capacity system, energy efficiency on the demand side and the supply side, which means making sure that your system is reformed and agile as you go. And the third part is definitely regional integration. And mind you, I think Morocco is the only African country that is now fully interconnected to Europe, electricity-wise and gas-wise, bi-directionally in both directions. We have an interconnection with Spain, and we are ramping that up with additional interconnections with other countries. But to cut a long story short, a long story of the last 2 decades, in the last few months, I think His Excellency talked a lot about the war, the Russian-Ukraine war. In our case, what has helped, I think, in our energy/economic model development in the last few months is the fact that we had our own mini gas crisis before Putin invaded Ukraine. Because if you remember, October of last year, Algeria cut the gas to Europe, Morocco being the transit country. There you go. We were all gathered in Glasgow to celebrate COP26 and put our hands on our chest and swear that we will never build any new coal plant. Well, there you go. I had to tell the international community that we cannot do that with an empty pipeline and no gas in the system.
Sure.
So for us, we had a few months before the war in Europe to get ourselves ready and have an emergency plan. And I think if I look at now retrospectively how we managed it, we had to rebuild trust with our partners. Okay. Spain, Portugal, France, along the way. We had to basically discuss issues of transparencies, and we agreed very quickly to put together certificates of origins of the gas, of the international LNG that we will buy, but also that stands for the green electrons that we want to trade together. And then finally, we agreed on how we're going to monetize infrastructure. So brownfield infrastructure, a shared infrastructure that we already have. We don't want it to be sitting idle. I think the last thing that the world needs today, or emerging and developed markets would need is an idle, empty infrastructure. Wherever that infrastructure is, we are all barely coming out from a major pandemic. Our supply chains have been totally dislocated. So I think it's very much important that all the partners are having the same sort of vision when it comes to how you treat the energy sector, and then when the energy sector can be a vehicle of prosperity, not of war. I think I'll close that line there. So that confirmed basically the choice that we were making over the last few years, but really accelerated by the mini gas crisis that we had, and hopefully, and luckily, we were able to get our acts together a bit before everybody else. To get back to the role of renewables, I mean, indeed, I'm not here to say that, yes, Morocco, like other Mediterranean countries, or South American countries, or Southeast Asian countries, has an undeniable solar and wind potential. I mean, we all know that. There are some regions in the world where you can find more than 70-80% capacity factor for wind. What we are making sure to have is the ability, first the ease to do business, and some sort of facilitating the act of investing. Because there are a couple of points, a couple of decisions that we made as a country over the last few years when we wanted to transition from our, I would say, traditional and ancient development model, economic and social, to our new development model. Is there are a few criteria that we want to tick for ourselves. First, the state does not have to put subsidies in when it comes to, and the state should not take technology risk. So everything we do and the way we handle our energy projects, renewable energy projects, and then now hydrogen and ammonia and the fuels of the future projects is to ensure that we work hand in hand with our private partners, national and international, so that risk is being handled properly along the way. And there's no issue around keeping that trust in the system along the way. The second thing that we definitely want to keep is, as I said early on, making sure that our system is being reformed as we go. Because the way, at the end of the day, if your single buyer or your TSO or your gas buyer does not want to buy whatever you are selling him, you can have all the grand plans in the world, it won't change anything. So that reform program, and that's why we signed at COP27 the Sustainable Energy Trade Roadmap with 4 of our European counterparts, Spain, Portugal, France, and Germany, is to ensure that our markets are evolving in a relatively common way, even if we don't have totally integrated markets, but at least we see things eye to eye when it comes to electricity trade and going forward energy trade. And the last thing that I will finish on is to ensure that the financial sector, the financial community, is very much aligned with that. Because one of the things that we start to notice, especially in countries like Morocco, where we have those 20 years of advance in terms of regulatory framework and projects that we have put in place. For those of you who have not visited Ouarzazate, I'll strongly recommend that you visit Noor Ouarzazate, that is one of the largest CSP plants in the world, where we tested some technologies when it comes to storage and concentrated solar power. So all this to say that now what we are noticing is that the financial sector is not willing to take climate risk on long-term renewable projects, which are supposed to actually to mitigate climate change. So now we are getting into that sort of, I don't want to use the word vicious circle, but that definitely as governments, because we have that experience of handling politics, the financial sector, the regulatory framework, I think we are very well positioned to try to find the right tricks to reassure everyone along the chain, the financial partners, the developers, and of course, the consumers who just want to have access to low-cost, low-carbon energy in the future.
Right, thank you so much. Yes, very complicated issue. Well, while we're at it, then obviously I would like to move to Greece because it's sort of this panorama that we're doing and ask some of the same questions. I mean, Greece is at a crossroads in between the north and the south of the Mediterranean. And I was wondering, how do you see this? How do you handle the issue of energy transition, obviously, and the challenges and the opportunities, that Greece's energy security and green transition offer?
First of all, let me thank you for the kind invitation. And let me say also that currently we face an unprecedented catastrophic energy crisis. An energy crisis which is fueled by the ongoing war of Russia against Ukraine. So there are two things that the European member states, that Europe should guarantee. First is affordable prices for the households and for the businesses. And second is security of supply. Both things can be accommodated by green transition. Green transition goes together with diversifying the sources of energy and the types of the energy that we use. Energy transition is compatible with affordable prices and predictable prices. And why I say this? Because currently the cheapest way, the most cost-effective way to produce energy is by utilizing the sun and the wind. And of course, green transition goes also with energy security because of that. Let me say an example. Currently, in Greece, 46% of our electricity consumption comes from renewables. Greece is number 8 in the world when it comes to the contribution of the renewables, including hydro, to the total electricity mix. We want this to arrive to 60% over the next 3 years and to 80% by 2030. According to an Ernst Young report published 2 weeks ago, Greece is ranking among the 2 first places in the world when it comes to the attractiveness of the renewable investments. Number 1 is Morocco. Number 2 is Greece.
Thank you for that.
That's very nice.
You should thank EY. So that shows what is the right direction and the medium to long-term strategy. In order to achieve that very ambitious green energy transition, integrated infrastructure that will link Greece with the neighboring countries, both in terms of electricity, but also in terms of gas transportation, is very crucial. Currently, we are discussing with Egypt, for example, for building a direct electricity cable of 3 gigawatt capacity that will help us to import green energy at very cost-effective prices to Greece, and from Greece to export it to the center of Europe through another direct electricity cable that we are planning with Austria and Germany. We are also upgrading and expanding the electricity interconnections with the neighboring countries, with the Balkan countries. So by the end of the first Q of 2023, we will have doubled the electricity interconnection with Bulgaria. We are planning to double the electricity interconnection with Italy and with North Macedonia, and to triple the electricity interconnection with Albania by the end of 2030. Also, we have just inaugurated 2 months ago the commercial operation of a new gas pipeline which connects Greece with Bulgaria with a capacity of 3 BCM, expandable to 5 BCM, just with the change of a compressor. And we are going to have a second gasification plant in Greece, an FSRU, north of Greece, ready by the end of 2023. We have another FSRU which is near to the final investment decision, and the regulator has already granted three licenses to 3 other potential FSRUs. So over the next 2 years, Greece's import capacity, LNG capacity, could well exceed 20 BCM. And this will help us to secure energy security and adequacy of supply to all the northern European countries, northern to Greece, to Bulgaria, to Romania, even up to Ukraine, utilizing existing infrastructure like the Trans-Balkan pipeline. So this is mainly the strategy that we have designed well before this war started, and currently we're implementing. So we're transforming, in fact, Greece to a main hub for green energy and for gas for the broader area of southeastern Europe.
All right, well, you began with the word catastrophic, but then you gave us a very good idea of what could be done, so thank you. All right, so some of these questions as well then for Osama Mubarak, who is, again, the Secretary General of the East Mediterranean Gas Forum. The East Mediterranean Gas Forum has been doing a lot, achieved some successes in the past few years. So looking at the future, what role do you envisage for you in terms of boosting cooperation, in terms of boosting the dialogue between the different parts of the area?
Thank you. First, I would like to thank the Italian government for the kind invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be among these distinguished panelists. So I think the EMGF, although it is a relatively infant organization, it was, the first meeting was in January 2019, before the crisis, before the COVID, and also before the current geopolitical crisis. But I think what happened during the past 2 years put more emphasis on collaboration and partnerships. And what could something like the EMGF, getting the stakeholders together, can do to overcome a lot of challenges. So, because the main objective of the EMGF was that there was a lot of potential, a lot of gas discoveries in the region that is more than the existing regional demand, with even a lot of potential for further discoveries. But these gas were somehow stranded. So getting the different stakeholders together, collaborating with consumers, producers, and transit countries, we were able to overcome some of these challenges and to unlock a lot of potential. Already, gas flows are flowing from Egypt and Israel to the EU. This year, I think the gas flows were increased about 30% over than the last year. And I think this is very good to diversify the gas supplies, especially with what's happening in Europe, given the energy crisis. And we are expecting also these volumes to increase even more in the next first quarter of 2023. So given this situation, also the EMGF is quite conscious about the climate change challenge and the climate action. So what we're trying to do is to strike the right balance between energy security and energy transition. And I think I very much like the name of the new ministry in Italy, which is Environment and Energy Security, which I think it takes the essence of what can we do. We're still keeping the interest of the environment, but we're not forgetting the energy security. And somehow this is what we are trying to do in the EMGF. That's why we have, the ministers have recently approved the long-term strategy of the forum with 7 strategic objectives, and one of them is talking about climate action and environment. And we have recently, during the COP27 that took place in Sharm el-Sheikh, launched the EMGF Decarbonization Initiative with the aim to decarbonize the gas facilities in the region of the member countries. And our main objective is to set a plan that is taking place between 6 to 8 years. How can we decarbonize these facilities? And at the same time, what are the policies and regulations that can stimulate and encourage this plan? These are our 2 main targets from the initiative. The initiative, I believe, was very well received. We're working now with our stakeholders, with our partners from the member countries and even beyond, our observers, the US, EU, and the World Bank and other stakeholders. How can we accelerate the implementation of these initiatives? Taking into consideration that we don't want to compromise the energy security or the energy transition.
Right, well, yes, always a difficult balance to strike. Thank you. All right, well, I would like to move on to Gilberto Dialuce, who's the president of Enea, and look at more from a scientific point of view, the role of Enea in promoting energy energy transition. So if you could tell us a bit more about the research and the innovations and how the scientific institutions can help us on this topic. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everyone, and many thanks for this kind of invitation, giving the opportunity to ENEA, the Italian National Agency for New Technologies, Energy and Sustainable Development, to highlight the centrality, let me say, of research, innovation, to foster the energy transition process. The already visible impacts of climate change, together with growing awareness of the looming climate crisis, have increased the pressure to act regardless of the political system. The goal of climate neutrality by 2050 implies the creation of an energy mix based on green technologies, looking at renewables in the short term, but also at clean energy carriers and other technologies, including hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, biomass, production of heat from renewables. Given that to do the further steps from 2030 to the middle of the century with only current technologies will be a very increasingly challenging. Fourth generation nuclear plants are also being studied, and in the longer perspective also nuclear fusion. But in parallel we must develop and demonstrate level of novel and, let me say, disruptive renewable energy technologies and energy storage solution, because due to their intermittence, today there are no technological solutions that allow us to use renewables only. However, we have several options for their storage, hydro, electrochemical, and chemical. But while we own the technologies and the knowledge for the first of the three, researchers and academics believe it is possible to find a winner solution for the other ones in a reasonable time. There is the need also to invest in long-term energy storage technologies to ensure seasonal storage, with a view to the phase out of the natural gas. And also clean hydrogen can play a role for this, for long-term storage, but also to reduce greenhouse gas emission, in particular in sectors that are difficult to decarbonize by means of existing solutions, such as heavy duty and long distance transport, as well as carbon intensive industry, the so-called hard-to-abate industries. And it's also crucial to the energy transition process, the implementation of digital and ICT technologies to build interconnected, resilient, and flexible energy systems that go beyond the traditional boundaries between supply and demand. And at the same time, this new technology will require also new safeguards against the cyber attacks. There is also an important sector that we need to focus on is the energy efficiency. The energy efficiency principle as the first step we need to take into account to foster the energy transition needs to be considered in a very important way, because the actual implementation of this principle requires policymakers to address multiple barriers depending on the different sector to be targeted. And to reduce the costs caused by energy inefficient buildings, consistent potential should be exploited, where economic, institutional, and also behavioral barriers still remain. And the policymakers should consider to prioritize the intervention that direct incentives towards the ones that allow maximizing cost effectiveness and the social impact. And this context is important to highlight the centrality of the research to sustain the development of the energy sector, both in terms of technological breakthrough, but also in terms of support to the academia, the strategic industry, as well as public entities and citizens. And in this area also the cooperation in the Mediterranean area could be very important to be developed, because to create a strong cooperation among Mediterranean region is necessary to accelerate the energy transition. In the course of this belief, INEA is a member, it keeps the presidency of MEDENER, the Mediterranean Association National Agency for the Energy Management in this area, that can play an important role as a bridge between European countries and the Mediterranean area to create also new opportunities in terms of projects and initiatives in the energy framework as well. In particular, regarding the development of renewable energies, Egypt and Morocco has very important and ambitious targets for this, and the building sector, also not only in this country but in the whole Mediterranean area, is responsible for the largest share of the final energy consumption, about 30%. So according to the demographic increase, the intensification of the urbanization, to promote energy efficiency, it is a paramount importance for enforcing energy security at the same time. And many countries in the Mediterranean area are also already implementing a national energy efficiency action plan, but the role of industry is also crucial. Energy efficiency gains in industry can generate multiple benefits by means of the sparring economic growth. And in order to support this policy-oriented efforts, we think that all the countries around the Mediterranean area must also establish strategic partnerships along the whole innovation supply chain, from the activities performed at universities, but also to the demonstration facilities. And these coordinated activities must extend the diffusion of availability of technologies that allow a rational use of energy across the sector. And because the positive impact in terms of investment requirements and energy efficiency gains should be devoted mainly to the improved buildings, but also district heating and cooling, energy recovery. And ENEA is the national agency operating in the Mediterranean area, is strongly committed to cooperate with all these partners, sharing its experience and best practice in technology innovation to help the whole area to achieve the decarbonization target by 2050.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I wanted, last but not least, obviously, Samantha Gross, Director, Energy Security and Climate Initiative for the Brookings Institution. Thank you for being here. I guess we've heard about all these different things that are going on. So I wanted to ask you, what are the challenges? What is most concerning and what should be most worried about, once you put everything together? Because I heard the word catastrophic here, but then also some excellent solutions and ways to, take care of what's going on. So what are the challenges? What are the things that should be, a concern?
Sure, and I think I'll start by saying that we've been hearing all day about the catastrophic loss of gas supply from Russia as a result of the war in Ukraine. In an ideal terms, in a perfect world, this would bring awareness to the fact that climate isn't the only reason why we want to change to an energy system that doesn't have greenhouse gas emissions. This kind of system is also a real boon for energy security. The kinds of resources that produce renewable electricity are much more widely dispersed than the oil and gas that we're largely reliant on today, which inherently gives us a more secure energy system. Maybe not a completely independent energy system as we've talked about for Europe, but one that's much more regional and much more geopolitically secure than the system we have today. And so it sounds like I should stop talking now. But the problem is that we don't live in that world just yet. And the transition from where we are today to that world is actually quite complex. And that's where I see the biggest challenges right now. Natural gas was a really clear bridge to a low carbon future when, frankly, that gas was inexpensive and coming through a pipeline system that already existed. Now that we're in a situation that that's not the case anymore, things are looking much more difficult. The world, the region here, is making infrastructure decisions that are difficult. You don't want to leave assets stranded that don't fit into a low carbon future. And not all natural gas infrastructure is easily converted to move hydrogen in the future. It's something I hear a lot of discussion about, but hydrogen is a tricky little molecule, and it's a little bit more difficult to transport, and it also requires different metallurgy than natural gas. Not that you can't think of this, but you need to think about it in advance when you're planning new infrastructure. And that's something that is really important to the folks sitting here on the stage with me today, to make sure that whatever infrastructure we're building is fit for the future and not just for the present. Another thing that's really challenging is it's easy to talk about a renewable future, but not all uses of natural gas are easily replaced by renewables. Actually, I've done most of my energy-related work in Europe and Germany, and they're a particularly good example of difficult to replace uses of natural gas, where it's really focused on home heating and on industry, where it takes a lot of time and a lot of investment to turn those over. And so these are really difficult issues. They don't solve themselves easily, but I'm sharing the stage with the kind of people who are in the right positions to think about how to solve those challenges. And there's one additional thing that I'd just really like to say while we're talking about challenges, talking about geopolitics and energy transition, that I haven't heard yet today, but I feel like is worth saying. And that is that Russia was likely to fare poorly during the energy transition, regardless of what has happened in the past year. It's very dependent on fossil fuel revenues for both its government revenues to balance its current accounts from a macroeconomic point of view. So this was already going to be a challenge. And it may look like the Russians hold the upper hand, particularly with respect to supplying gas to Europe right now. But Russia has made its long-term problems much worse with its actions in Ukraine. Now the world is not just looking at phasing out fossil fuels. The world is looking at preferentially phasing out Russian fossil fuels. And so Russia has made its problem come forward in time and made it steeper with the actions that it has taken. And so I want to remind people in Europe and in the region, it's easy for me to say sitting in gas-rich North America, but to remember that this is a long-term problem from Russia, whereas this region, the Mediterranean region, and Europe in general, has solutions to its current gas crisis. And so I want to leave it on that. I think that's optimism mixed with schadenfreude, but is still worth mentioning.
Optimism mixed with really scary things that, you're right, have been brought forward. All right, we still have a little bit of time for another round, I'd say, if everyone's quick in their responses. So I'll just go back into the order. Tornerei dal Ministro, so I'll switch to Italian, per parlare un attimo di nuovo di Italia, perché Samantha Gross parlava di gas naturale e la transizione, come sappiamo, è lunga, non è e non sarà immediata, quindi volevo capire un po' il ruolo del gas naturale in Italia nella transizione e come possiamo lavorare meglio con i nostri partner, la Grecia ad esempio, il Nord Africa, cosa stiamo facendo da questo punto di vista?
Ma sostanzialmente in parte ho già detto prima
era per
su quella che è
concentrarsi
l'azione complessiva. Sicuramente dare sicurezza e continuità al sistema è l'obiettivo fondamentale. Accelerare su quello che è il fronte dell'idrogeno, il fronte delle biomasse, del biometano, è l'altro percorso, quindi rinnovabili, fotovoltaico, eolico, geotermico, perché in Italia abbiamo anche la parte del geotermico. E poi la grande sfida dell'idrogeno, come anche citata precedentemente, è la sfida dell'idrogeno che ci vede legati anche al Nord Africa. Quindi il disegno dell'Italia in questo ambito è quello molto simile al ragionamento che ha fatto il collega ministro greco per l'area dei Balcani. Noi possiamo rovesciare quella che è la clessidra storica che vedeva la Russia, il Nord Stream e quindi il grande afflusso di gas dalla Russia, e possiamo rovesciarlo per il periodo della transizione che dobbiamo dire va fino al 2050 certamente, facendo dell'Italia una lab del gas mediterraneo destinato al nord Europa anche, e utilizzando i percorsi che già abbiamo, ma anche convertendo quelli che sono le attuali strutture, gli attuali gasdotti in gasdotti idonei per il trasporto dell'idrogeno. Il trasporto dell'idrogeno che può vederci impegnati anche alla produzione, in particolare con il Nord Africa. Noi abbiamo in corso una serie di rapporti con i paesi nordafricani che riguardano l'idrogeno e dall'altra parte riguardano l'elettricità, proprio la rete elettrica. Con la Tunisia è diciamo in corso la definizione di un progetto, di un'interconnessione molto rilevante che riguarda la rete elettrica e che quindi ci metterebbe in stretta connessione con il Nord Africa. Quindi rete di gas, conversione delle reti di gas per idrogeno, rete elettrica e naturalmente tutto questo anche ancora sul contingente rigassificatori, perché comunque quella che è la parte delle strutture di gasdotti che collegano l'Italia non è sufficiente per dare autonomia neanche al nostro paese, ancorché nell'ambito d'Italia ci sia un afflusso di gas che transita per i paesi che per ragioni di solidarietà verso i paesi vicinori. Cioè, io vorrei ricordare, ieri sono arrivati in Italia almeno 40 milioni di metri cubi di gas dalla Russia, 45 mi pare ieri, ho il report giornaliero e naturalmente, ma è chiaro che non si sono fermati 45 milioni di metri cubi, se sono fermati per l'Italia se ne saranno fermati 15 e gli altri vanno a sua volta ribaltati sui paesi del nord Europa. Questo è in un momento di transizione vicina, di contingenza, quello di visione più ampia è quello di avere tutto l'afflusso di gas, di idrogeno, oltre che le produzioni nazionali e fare da hub per il sistema d'Europa.
Chiarissimo, grazie. Ringrazio il Ministro. I'll switch back and well, since green hydrogen was mentioned, I would go back to Morocco then, because the green hydrogen industry in Morocco is advanced from what I understand, and you had mentioned it as well. So if you could tell us a bit more about the green hydrogen, how do you think that could be helpful? Because the transition is long, it's not something that's going to happen immediately. So I was curious to see your point of view.
Yes, thank you. I think we've covered already, and I'm still stuck in what Samantha was saying about.
Please comment on what Samantha was saying.
I was still thinking about that.
She was saying it's not quite. You know, she pulled up some very interesting, queries that we should worry about. I was a bit worried after she spoke.
No, actually, I think she's raising a great flag, which could be linked actually to your question about hydrogen, because if we start discriminating one way or the other, discriminating Russian fossil fuels, discriminating certain types of technologies, pricing in and out, negative externalities on an arbitrary basis, I'm afraid that we might lose sight of why we are doing all this. I mean, apart from, of course, handling the issue of this existential threat of the 21st century that is climate change, and mind you, in the global south, we are taking the hit as we see it every day, where you have wide arrays of tourism industry being wiped out because of a flood or because of a drought, or and I'm thinking of some islands in the Pacific that might disappear over the next 20 years. 25% of the UN membership might disappear before the end of this century. I think that's quite alarming. So my concern when policymakers start to discriminate is that we will end up with a more expensive and non-affordable energy for our populations and our economies and our industries than a few years ago. And it gets back to your question about hydrogen. It's exactly how we want to do it in Morocco and how we are looking at developing a hydrogen ecosystem and coming up what we called a Morocco offer, a value proposition when it comes to green hydrogen and green ammonia. We like to look at it in a very integrated way. And because we know that us, ourselves, and a few other countries in the world might emerge as the low-cost, zero-carbon hydrogen players in the next, say, 20 years.
That's why I asked you a question.
Yeah. We want to ensure that there are no additional externalities that are pricing into the system because of security reasons, because of geopolitics, because of discrimination that we might see along between now and this transition, this long transition that is taking the way. And of course, we are making sure that our infrastructure, the existing infrastructure and the future infrastructure is hydrogen fit or hydrogen. We make sure that the technical aspects are taken into account. But my concern is on a wider scale to reach that low-cost, zero-carbon molecule, let's say hydrogen. And for Morocco, that's why in my first trip to Berlin, when our relationship with Germany became a bit better, I said, well, you know what? I'm looking at all those studies that great brains like Samantha put together, and we can actually reach green hydrogen production costs at less than $2 per kilogram in 10, 15, 20 years. Why don't we just do that? And mind you, I mean, I was really met with disbelief in the room, and I remember we had the discussion also with Minister Habeck. Of course, when you are in the middle of a war, we are, as policymakers, we don't have the mindset to think about those, the economics and the ingredients that are needed to reach that. But that's exactly what we want. So for us to reach less than $2 per kilogram hydrogen, we know that we need the economies of scale, we need access to lands and make sure that our natural capital is monetized in a proper way. We need connectivity with the major markets. We need stability in that transition over the next 20 years, stability in the frameworks and the contracts. But surprise, surprise, a couple of months later, I started getting offers from the private sector, non-binding offers, $1.7 per kilogram. And then I'm like, damn it, why did I say that $2 per kilogram? And
there you go.
Just to say that once you put all the ingredients, I think that the private sector, the financial partners, and our international partners would need to have, I think it creates what our common mentor used to call it 20 years ago, the innovation bubble, to enable costs to decrease over time. And that's exactly the type of transition that we want as policy.
It's also thinking outside the box, because we're used to certain ways of thinking and then we don't.
Or no, I mean, we don't have any other choice, I think, today. We don't have any other choice if we want to win this transition in the next 20 years. We don't owe it to our children now. I think we owe it to ourselves.
Oh, that's a good one, too. Thank you, yes. And so similar question also for the Minister, His Excellency from Greece. You had said before, it's really important to make sure that people aren't paying too much for energy, and we need to protect the families and the businesses. Right now, a lot of European countries are basically subsidizing. It's the government paying, it's debt paying. So, and our children will be paying. So it's long, the energy transition is long. How do you feel about, that and energy security going forward? What are the risks? What are we excluding? What are we not thinking about?
If we have done 10 years ago what we currently do regarding green transition, things would be much different.
Are we going to make the same mistake and just not do it?
That's why I think also coming back to the previous topic that green hydrogen will come much sooner than someone could estimate before this energy crisis. Even now, green hydrogen, even now with the current prices of gas, is competitive. What I mean is that this year, for example, in 2022, we have deployed almost 2,000 megawatts of renewables. That will save us 15% of gas imports next year. that would be used to generate electricity that will now come from the renewables that we deployed this year. So that is why that things are moving much faster than initially designed. We had a pandemic, we have a geostrategic crisis, we have a refugee crisis, but still climate crisis is the ultimate crisis. So for sure we have to find the ways to eliminate the causes of the climate change, and this is to significantly reduce CO2 emissions. So carbon neutrality by 2050 is the ultimate target for Europe, and this is what we have to fulfill. Now, meanwhile, we have the consumers, we have the households, we have the vulnerable households, and we have the businesses and the European industry. All of them are threatened by the current energy crisis. The households cannot afford to buy these excessive energy prices, and the European industry is losing competitiveness by the day, having these excessive gas prices and electricity prices. For this, we need to do something now as Europe, all together, united. So Greece, Italy, Belgium, and Poland are trying to persuade our counterparts that we should apply a price cap on natural gas at a European level that would bring down gas prices and therefore electricity prices. And I think that at the end of the day that we will manage to do it with Gilberto and our other counterparts. Spain is with us, and other 11 member states are with us. At the same time, of course, we need to subsidize prices. In Greece, we have done it. We have designed and we have implemented a windfall tax mechanism since last July that has given us the opportunity to capture until now more than 2.5 billion euro from the windfalls of the electricity generation companies. And that mechanism was adopted by Europe 2 months ago. And a similar mechanism is already implemented to Italy, to my knowledge.
Yes.
So, but this is not enough. This is not enough.
Yes.
The state budget should contribute more. And not all member states have the same power, the same flexibility to increase the debt or to find the necessary money from the necessary resources from the state budget in order to keep prices low for the households, especially for the most vulnerable. That's why what we say and what we propose from Greece is that we should we should build a European fund, a European mechanism, a European tool to help to finance the member states, to help member states absorb a part of the increase, so to make households and businesses go through this excessive energy crisis.
Without succumbing. Thank you. All right, I see, unfortunately, we don't have much time. So what I wanted to do, however, I did want to come back quickly, is just a quick, same question for the last three of you, is what journalists like to ask in these cases is what keeps you up at night. But what I mean is, what worries you the most? Because this is a long transition. So if you could just give a quick answer, but what worries you the most from your point of view?
I think the challenge is quite huge. It's more than just one country or one entity to overcome it. That's why I think partnerships and collaboration is key to overcome this. It's about the governments, the private sector, the financial institutes have to come together to find solutions to the huge problems that we're facing.
Thank you, Secretary General Mobaraz. And then I wanted to ask Gilberto Dialuce, what worries you the most from your point of view, because you have a completely different angle that you're looking at this from.
We think that it's very important, as just my friend Osama said, the cooperation among all the stakeholders in the energy sector, not only the policymakers, but also the energy companies and also the regulators we have to mention, and also the institutions that are charged with the research and innovation. It is also important to have a strong coordination about the target, because as we sometimes are seeing in the European Union level, for instance, it's very easy to establish new targets and very challenging targets, but it's very difficult to reach them without new investment, new research. So it is important to keep on the track this pathway.
Thank you. And thank you, President De Luce. And Samantha Gross, so wrapping everything up, what keeps you up at night? What worries you the most?
You know, I'm going to say two things, but I'm going to say them very quickly, so forgive me.
We trust you.
The first thing that worries me in particular is that we see very lofty goals put forward by a lot of different, by my country, by the European Union, by others, but I worry about the path dependence of all this and whether we're thinking hard enough about making decisions that keep us on that path. Every decision we make needs to be fit for the future, and I worry that particularly in times of crisis, we don't do that. The second thing that keeps me up at night is something I haven't heard at all today, and that is I worry about justice in the energy transition tremendously. Coming out of the COP that took place in Sharm el-Sheikh a few weeks ago, we saw some really good things happen on the sidelines, and that's happened traditionally in the last few COPs. Big deals on the sidelines, but those tend to take place big countries, big emitters. If you want to make a difference, you go where the emissions are. But the problem is that the issues that matter most to the world's poorest, to the countries that Leila said may be underwater soon, those decisions are sort of left to the very difficult, thorny, consensus-based decision-making process of the COP. And I worry that we will not be able to make decisions fast enough in that process to save these countries and the world's poorest from the issues that they face. But that's the path we're on right now, and that keeps me up at night.
Thank you. That was very important to say, so thank you very much. All right, well, that's all the time we have for this session. I thank everyone so much, our distinguished panelists, our honored ministers. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you to our audience.